I canceled your daughter's Sweet 16 venue, booked it for my baby shower instead. Sister texted. Same date, I'd paid $6,800 deposit. Dad, babies trump teenagers. I called the venue, showed contracts. When they told her, you're banned, and we're suing. My name is Marcus. I'm 38 years old, and I drive a sewage vacuum truck for Kellerman County Sanitation. I need to tell you about the text message my sister sent to our family group chat at 10:43 on a Tuesday night. The one where she announced she'd booked the perfect venue for her baby shower. Exposed brick, great natural light. April 12th, Hartley Hall. The same venue, the same date, the one I had a signed contract and a $6,800 deposit receipt for. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me back up. I grew up in Reedsville. One main strip, a water tower with the high school mascot painted on it, the specific social economy of a mid-sized Midwestern town, where everyone is perpetually measuring themselves against everyone else and pretending not to. My parents, Walt and Diane, bought a house on Callaway Road in 1987. 3 bedrooms, a cracked driveway Walt was always about to repave. He never did. I think the driveway is still there. I think it will outlast all of us. Walt communicated through implication. If he approved of something, he watched it. Diane was warmer, genuinely warm, but with a quality that was also conditional in ways I spent a long time trying to separate before I understood they came as a package. My sister Darla was 6 years younger than me. By the time she became recognizably herself, small, magnetic, funny in the specific effortless way that makes adults say personality, I was old enough to observe the adjustment. The way the house tilted slightly. The way attention tracked differently. I want to be fair. Darla is genuinely charismatic. This isn't a story about a villain. It's about what happens to the people around a very charming person when no one ever teaches her that charm is not the same as being owed everything. The unequal treatment came in small, deniable increments. My sophomore science project, a working water filtration system built from salvaged pipe and gravel, won a county competition. Diane put the ribbon on the refrigerator. It was gone in a week. 3 years later, Darla was cast as lead in the school drama production, 30 minutes long afternoon show, and Walt took a half day from work. He had never once left work early for anything involving me. When I got a full scholarship to an engineering certificate program, I mentioned it at dinner. Walt said, "Not bad." When Darla got a call back from a regional modeling agency, Diane called both grandmothers and threw a dinner party. There was also the matter of my 21st birthday, which landed on a Saturday, and which my parents acknowledged with a card and a meal at the kitchen table that was entirely unremarkable in its ordinariness. Darla's 21st was a restaurant in the city, 60 miles each way, with 7 of her friends, a dessert that came out with candles, and a song, and a photo album Diane had assembled from childhood pictures forward. When I mentioned the disparity once, carefully, to Diane, she said, "Marcus, you've always been so self-sufficient. Darla needs more encouragement." I turned that sentence over for years before I understood that what it actually meant was, you ask for less, so we give you less. And we've decided to call that a compliment. I don't say this to seem pathetic. I say it because I spent a long time building explanations around these moments. They were busy. I didn't need as much encouragement. I seemed fine. And I need you to understand the architecture of those explanations before I tell you how they came down. I have driven a sewage vacuum truck for 12 years. Before you form a picture, I am licensed, certified, and hold a senior operator certification. I service residential and commercial septic systems across 4 municipalities. Without people who do my job, the county's public health infrastructure backs up within weeks. I am, in the language of the County Environmental Services Board, essential infrastructure personnel. My sister has described me to her friends as being in waste management, said the way someone describes a relative's DUI conviction. The careful, sideways phrasing. She chose it herself. I have a daughter, Lily, who turned 15 last spring. Quick, funny, deadpan, in a way she absolutely got from me. Her mom Josie and I separated when Lily was 7 and have managed genuine co-parenting which requires constant low-level effort and which I consider one of the things I've done right. My apartment is on Decker Street, second floor, overlooking a parking lot I've made peace with. A good couch, a kitchen table I built from a reclaimed oak slab, a 60-pound dog named Diesel with a permanently skeptical expression who meets me at the door every day. My best friend Riggins, known since 9th grade, electrician, consistently shows up with beer, is the first person I call when anything happens. I kept showing up for the family through all of this. Drove 40 minutes to Reedsville for holidays. Called Diane most Sundays. Offered the truck when people needed help moving, because I have a truck and in family logic that makes me the truck. I was, by any observable metric, a present and reliable son and brother. The reliability was never returned in kind. Darla's wedding, 3 years ago, I was not in attendance. Her stated reason, delivered through Diane. I just didn't want any awkward conversations with my friends about what Marcus does. A 93-person reception. Seated me at a table with people she could afford to put me next to, so her friends wouldn't have to find out her brother drives a sewage truck. Walt. When I raised it afterward, Darla's always been sensitive to what people think. You've never needed that. Different wiring. I told myself that was a reasonable explanation. I was wrong. Last October, Lily turned 15. I started planning her Sweet 16 early because Lily is a planner. She had an actual vision board, physical scissors, printed photographs, the works. She wanted exposed brick and good lighting. I researched venues, drove to look at 3 in person, and settled on Hartley Hall, a renovated carriage house outside Reedsville that did private events. Exactly what Lily had circled. I signed the contract in November. Paid the deposit, $6,800. I have the receipt. I have 2 copies, one physical, one photographed in my phone, because I work in infrastructure and I understand the value of backups. Lily was so happy during the venue tour. The event coordinator, Greer, immediately understood the vision and started sketching layout ideas on a notepad, where the DJ would go, which direction the dessert table should face to catch the window light. How many round tables would fit without crowding the dance floor? Lily leaned in, pointing at the sketch, offering opinions. She had prepared for this conversation. She had printed out a reference photo from her vision board and handed it to Greer like a professional presenting deliverables. She is 15, and she takes things seriously, and she gets that from me, and I am not remotely subtle about being proud of it. Lily kept saying, "This is perfect," in the slightly disbelieving tone teenagers use when they actually mean something deeply. That specific afternoon is something I am choosing to hold. I mentioned the booking to the family at Christmas dinner. Offhand. Said I'd locked in a venue for April 12th. Walt said, "Nice." Diane said she'd love to come. Darla was there, 6 months pregnant, visibly uncomfortable on the dining chair, half listening. She asked where. I said Hartley Hall. She nodded. We talked about other things. The text came on a Tuesday in January, 10:43 at night, to the family group chat. Baby shower news. Darla had found the perfect venue. She was so excited, she had secured the exact date she wanted, April 12th, and the space was gorgeous. Exposed brick, great natural light. Hartley Hall. She had included 2 photos from her own walkthrough. April 12th, Hartley Hall. I read it 4 times. Took a screenshot, went to my physical folder, laid out the contract and deposit receipt side by side, and looked at them for a while. I called Riggins, who picked up on the second ring at nearly 11 at night. He said, "What happened?" I told him. There was a pause. Then, "She went there and canceled your booking." That was the mechanism. Darla had called Hartley Hall, identified herself as a family representative, said the April 12th booking needed to be released, claimed the event had been rescheduled, then rebooked the same date for herself. She had access to the venue name and date because I had told her at Christmas dinner while she was nodding and half listening and apparently filing it away. I sat with the full shape of it, not just the act, the sequence of decisions. Gather the information, call the venue, impersonate a family representative, cancel the booking, rebook for herself, announce it to 12 family members in capital letters. When I called Walt the next morning, he said, "Marcus, she's about to have a baby. Babies come first. You can find another venue for Lily. There it was. Not, your sister impersonated you to cancel your daughter's booking. Not, this is unacceptable regardless of pregnancy. Just, babies trump teenagers. I wrote that sentence down. I called Hartley Hall at 8:30 that morning and asked for the event coordinator. I was put through to the venue manager, Sloan, whose measured voice suggested he had already received some version of this call and had been hoping not to receive mine. I told him my name. I told him I had a signed contract and a deposit receipt for the April 12th booking. I told him I had not authorized any cancellation and had not contacted the venue since November. I told him that any communication suggesting otherwise had not come from me. He called back in 40 minutes. His voice had changed, the caution replaced by something more direct. He said the cancellation call had come from a woman who identified herself using my last name. He said they had a recording, as was their policy for booking changes. He said he was consulting with their legal team. 48 hours later, Greer called. My original booking was reinstated at no additional cost. The deposit from the fraudulent rebooking was refunded and that booking canceled. And she read from what sounded like a prepared legal statement. Hartley Hall would not be able to honor future bookings from the name and contact information used to place the fraudulent cancellation, as they took impersonation and booking fraud seriously as a matter of policy and legal obligation. Their counsel was evaluating whether to pursue civil action. She said she hoped Lily's party would be wonderful. Darla called me immediately after the venue reached her. Her voice was doing something I hadn't heard before. Not the confident performing tone, not the managed upset tone. Something raw and slightly disbelieving. Like someone who has just learned that actions can have consequences that don't get absorbed by the people around them. She said, "They banned me, Marcus. They're talking about lawyers." I said, "I know." She said, "I just thought you could move the date." I said, "Darla, just her name. The way you say a name when you want them to hear what's underneath." Silence. Then, "I didn't think it would turn into this." I said, "I know. That's part of what I want to talk to you about. Here's the part I hadn't told anyone except Riggins. 3 months earlier, I had found something out about my inheritance. My grandfather, Gerald, careful, quiet, lifelong manufacturing worker who saved the way people do when they've survived something, had died 2 years prior and left a modest estate divided among 3 grandchildren. Me, Darla, our cousin Finley. I had received less than expected, but attributed it to estate logistics. Finley called me in October. Distressed, her attorney had flagged the document during a separate estate matter, a notarized trust amendment dated 4 months before Gerald died, redirecting a significant portion of my share to Darla. The notary witness signature was Diane's. Gerald's handwriting on the amendment didn't match 20 years of birthday cards. His hands had shaken in his final months. I knew that, but this signature was different in a different way. Too deliberate where the real one had always been loose. I'm not a forensic examiner. I can't tell you with legal certainty what happened. What I can tell you is that Finley looked at me with an expression that communicated everything her careful words weren't saying. I sat in my car in her driveway. Then I drove home and started a folder. The venue situation joined the folder. The Instagram comment Darla had left on a public post 4 months earlier, her college friend had asked about the family. And Darla had written, "Lo, don't ask about my brother. He literally pumps sewage for a living." Was already in it. The wedding seating chart. 8 years of documented exclusions with stated reasons. I had not exploded. I had been building a record. After the venue situation, I stopped performing membership in a family that had treated my participation as optional for years. Stopped the Sunday calls. Stopped driving to Reedsville. 27 days before anyone reached out for a reason other than logistics. Diane finally called to ask about Easter. Not, "Are you okay?" Not, "I've been thinking about everything." Just, "Easter, yes or no?" During those 27 days on my side, my senior operator certification score came back as the highest the county had submitted to the state board in 6 years. My supervisor, a man named Sloan who kept a whiteboard full of scheduling mathematics only he understood, and who owned a mug reading "The Real MVP" that he considered the funniest object he'd ever received, walked into the garage bay while I was running a post-service check and said loudly, with 3 other operators present, "Marcus, best score we've sent up in 6 years. You want to announce it, or you want me to put it on the board?" I said I'd write it on the board myself. Then I stood in the bathroom for 30 seconds, just receiving it. Good news is something you have to practice receiving when you're unaccustomed to it. I started seeing Dr. Adler in November. Victorian converted office, a clock that ticked audibly, reading glasses he constantly pushed up onto his forehead and then forgot about. He had the specific quality of a person who had decided early in their career that the most useful thing he could do was be genuinely still. He asked questions and then actually waited for answers, not filling the silence with the next question the way people do when they've already formed the conclusion. In our 4th session, I listed my explanations for the family pattern. Darla's sensitive. I'm low maintenance. It doesn't bother me that much. Different wiring. He let them sit. Then he said, "What would you have to admit if you let go of the explanations?" I thought for a moment that she's been making a consistent choice about whether I count. Yes. And how long have you been helping her not live with the consequences? That question did something to me that I wasn't expecting. Not upsetting, clarifying. Like finding out there's a word for something you've been describing in long, exhausting sentences for years. I drove home feeling scraped clean. Not healed, just emptied in the useful way. Like a tank that's been properly serviced and is ready to do its job again. Naomi had come into my life through Riggins's wife the previous December, a children's librarian who paid close attention to things other people missed. She asked about my work without the careful phrasing people use when they're managing their own reaction. She came to see the truck once, asked to, and had technical questions about the vacuum mechanism and service scheduling. I found that I had never had a conversation about my actual work in which the other person was genuinely present for it. I hadn't realized how much I'd lowered the ceiling on what I expected until someone walked under it without ducking. Diane called in February. Sunday morning, the old slot. She worked through weather and Darla's pregnancy progress and then arrived at it. Darla and Shepard were buying a house. Deposit due in 12 days, short by a bridging amount. And I was always so level-headed about money. I want you to sit with that for a second. Level-headed about money. From the woman whose signature was on the notary line of the amendment that redirected my inheritance. From the family that had funded a 93-person wedding reception with no room for me in it. From my mother asking me for a financial bridge for the sister who had impersonated me to commit booking fraud against my teenage daughter's birthday party. I said I'd think about it. She said Darla was under a lot of stress. I said I understood. I called Riggins afterward. He said, "You're going to the folder." I said, "Yes." He said, "You want me there?" I said, "Close, but no." He said his phone would be on. I set a meeting at the Waverly Grill on Reedsville's main strip. Good lighting, background noise that doesn't let you pretend you haven't heard something. I asked Walt, Diane, and Darla. Shepard came too, which I hadn't specified. More witnesses. Fine. I waited until everyone had ordered, let the first minute sit quiet. Then I put the contract on the table. April 12th. Hartley Hall. I signed this in November. I paid $6,800. Lily had done a tour with the coordinator. She had plans. Deposit receipt beside it. When you called the venue, Darla, you told them you were canceling on behalf of the family. That was a specific decision. I'm not calling it a mistake. Darla looked at the contract. Walt looked at the table. I put the Instagram screenshot down next. Username. Timestamp. He literally pumps sewage for a living I can't. I watched her face go multiple colors. This is why I wasn't at your wedding. Not logistics, not guest count. You were embarrassed. You've been managing my visibility to your friends for 8 years and calling it logistics. I was in the outer ring at your reception next to a man whose name I never caught because you didn't want your friends to find out your brother drives a sewage truck. Walt said, "Son, Dad." Full stop. He went quiet. I put the trust amendment on the table last. The room changed when I did it. Diane went very still, not frozen. Still. The way people go still when something they've been half expecting has finally arrived. I'm not filing a legal claim today. I'm not here to threaten anyone. I'm here to name what's happened. This document redirected my grandfather's bequest into Darla's account. Your signature is on the notary line. I've had this since October. The silence that followed was different from the one before. The before silence had been people waiting to see what I would do. The after silence was people who had assumed certain things hadn't been seen, discovering they were wrong. Darla said quietly, "I didn't know about the amendment." Her voice had no performance in it. I swear, I wouldn't have. She looked at Diane. Mom. Diane looked at her hands for a long time. Then, "I thought I was protecting you, Darla. Marcus always you seemed like you didn't need it." I let that sit. Long enough to be uncomfortable. He seems fine is not the same as he doesn't need anything. I needed exactly what Darla needed. I just quieted down faster, so you stopped looking. That's not a personality difference. That's a pattern, and the pattern has a cost that I've been the one paying. Walt looked at the contract for a long time. Then, quietly, "The venue thing wasn't right, Darla." From Walt, who communicated primarily through implication, that sentence was practically a deposition. I addressed the money before I left. I wasn't going to provide a bridge loan. And I said why. Not as punishment, but as a statement of terms going forward. I was not an available financial resource for a family that had redirected my inheritance without my knowledge. If and when we rebuilt something honest, we could talk about what reciprocity looked like. But rebuilding required acknowledging that something had been broken. I was not going to fund a renovation on a house that hadn't been leveled yet. I drove home feeling something I'd been trying to name for months. Not anger, that had burned off in preparation. Not satisfaction. Something structural. My own weight, distributed correctly, on my own foundation. Lily's Sweet 16 happened on April 12th at Hartley Hall. Every detail exactly as planned. Exposed brick, the lighting, the layout Greer had sketched on her notepad during the tour Lily had prepared for, with a printed reference photo and opinions about dessert table placement. Walt gave a toast. He held the glass wrong, and his voice was slightly too loud, and he said, "Lily, you have one hell of a father." I should have said that a long time ago. He looked at me when he said it. The sentence was short enough that he couldn't lose his nerve in the middle of it, which I suspect was the point. Walt is not a toast person. This was a man who attended 17 of my cross-country races and communicated his support through the specific nod he gave after I crossed the finish line, which I spent years trying to read correctly. The nod was genuine. The toast was better. Both were late. I'm choosing to take them anyway. My dad communicated primarily through grunts and football commentary. A toast with direct eye contact, in this specific context, after everything that had happened at the Waverly Grill, was basically a confession. I received it. Darla sent a long message the following week. Private, not the group chat. She said she'd been a coward. She said the Instagram comment was wrong the moment she typed it, and she'd hoped I'd never see it. She said she understood if I was done. She did not ask me to forgive her, just said what was true. That was the most honest part. I haven't responded yet, not because I'm holding it over her, but because I'm taking the time to figure out what I actually want to say rather than what the occasion requires. That's new for me. The inheritance piece is likely not recoverable. The estate is settled. I sat with Dr. Adler about this for 2 sessions. He asked what it would mean for my sense of myself if it was never corrected. I said, "It means I know what happened." He said, "That was right." The clock ticked. Hartley Hall sent Darla a formal letter from their legal team. They ultimately didn't file a civil suit, but the documentation is there, which I understand she found genuinely unpleasant. Good. Naomi came over last Tuesday with takeout from the Thai place on Division and a library book she'd pulled from the display shelf. Municipal infrastructure, the history of sanitation systems in American cities, which she thought I'd appreciate. She had read the first chapter already. She had questions. We sat on the couch with Diesel wedged between us like a 60-pound arbitrator who had weighed the situation and found it acceptable. And she asked detailed, interested questions about how the systems in the book compared to what I actually managed in the field. And I found myself talking about my work the way I talk about it with colleagues, without translation, without apology. Afterward, she asked how I was doing with everything. I gave her an honest answer, which is something I've had to practice. Riggins texted the morning after Lily's party. How was it? I said, perfect. Lily good? Great. You good? Actually good. He sent a thumbs up, which from a man whose emotional vocabulary is primarily expressed through ill-timed jokes and unrequested opinions about sports, was basically a standing ovation. My name is Marcus. I'm 38 years old. I drive a sewage truck. I have a daughter who plans things with scissors and a vision board and danced until someone stacked the chairs. I have a signed contract, a deposit receipt, and a folder full of evidence that I was always more thorough, more careful, and more present than the people around me recognized. I sat at a table at the Waverly Grill and said every true thing I'd been building toward for 8 years, calmly and completely. And then I drove home. I am not the punchline of my sister's Instagram comment. I am the person who paid the deposit, kept the contract, made the call, and got my daughter her venue. Everything else is just logistics. That's enough. It's more than enough. It's exactly enough.